Hey there, welcome to Dread Lullabies. I'm so glad you're here with me tonight. You know, they say the night is for resting, but for some, the darkness is where the real world begins. Tonight, I've put together a few true stories that are meant to be heard in the quiet. Stories that remind us that sometimes the things that go bump in the night are more real than we'd like to believe. Before we get lost in the dark, I'd love to know where you're joining me from. So feel free to drop a comment and tell me where you're listening tonight. And if you find yourself coming back for more, maybe consider liking the video and subscribing. It really helps me keep these lullabies going for you. So, pull up the covers, get comfortable, and let's see what the night has in store for us. People often talk about warning smells or strange sensations that signal danger, but sometimes the most dangerous signal is not something you smell or see. Sometimes it is something you feel, and the feeling can be deeply misleading. If you are ever severely injured and losing a significant amount of blood, especially after something like a car accident, a fall, or another traumatic event, your body may begin to react in ways that seem almost comforting. Instead of sharp panic or obvious distress, you might start to feel warm. Not just warm, but deeply warm, almost cozy. Your body might feel heavy. Your mind might feel foggy. You might have an overwhelming urge to close your eyes and rest. That feeling is not comfort. It is not safety. It is your body shutting down. When someone loses a large amount of blood pressure drops. Our oxygen delivery to the brain and vital organs decreases. The body tries to compensate at first. Your heart rate may increase. Your breathing may become faster. Adrenaline floods your system. But as blood loss continues and oxygen levels fall, the brain begins to struggle. That warm, sleepy sensation is often a sign that the brain is not getting what it needs. People sometimes describe it as peaceful, calm, like they just want to lie down for a moment. The world might feel distant. Sounds might seem muffled. It can almost feel like drifting off to sleep after a long day. That is the dangerous part. If you close your eyes and allow yourself to drift, you may lose consciousness. And in cases of severe blood loss, unconsciousness can quickly lead to cardiac arrest. The heart cannot sustain circulation without adequate blood volume. The body can only compensate for so long before it reaches a breaking point. This is why trauma nurses, paramedics, and emergency responders do something that might seem harsh in the moment. They talk loudly, they call your name, they tap your face, they may even shout at you. It is not because they are being insensitive, it is because they are trying to keep you awake. Keeping a trauma patient conscious is often critical. If you are talking, responding, and keeping your eyes open, it is a sign that blood is still reaching your brain. The moment you stop responding, the situation becomes even more urgent. From the outside, it can look like someone is being mean or aggressive. In reality, they are fighting for your life. When a patient starts to close their eyes after severe trauma, alarms go off in the minds of medical professionals. They know what that warm, sleepy look can mean. They know that the body is running out of reserves. That urge to rest is not something to give into. If you are ever in a situation where you are badly injured and waiting for help, especially if you know or suspect you are losing a lot of blood, you have to fight that feeling. Keep your eyes open. Focus on something. Count backwards. Recite song lyrics. Think about a loved one. Do anything that keeps your mind engaged. Talk if you can, even if it feels pointless, even if your voice is weak. The act of speaking keeps your brain active and signals to rescuers that you are still responsive. It may feel counterintuitive. When you are exhausted and overwhelmed, closing your eyes feels natural. But in severe trauma, that instinct can be deadly. The medical teams are trained to recognize early signs of shock. Pale skin, rapid pulse, confusion, restlessness. And then that shift into lethargy and drowsiness. That is when urgency intensifies. When nurses yell, when they firmly say, "Stay with me," when they keep repeating your name. It is not dramatics. It is strategy. They are trying to stimulate your brain, maintain responsiveness, and buy time until bleeding can be controlled and fluids or blood can be administered. In emergency rooms and ambulances, every second matters. The window between severe blood loss and cardiac arrest can close quickly. There is also something deeply human about that warm, drifting sensation. It can feel almost comforting in the middle of chaos. But that comfort is deceptive. It is the body conserving energy. It is the brain beginning to lose adequate oxygen. Understanding that can make a difference. If you ever witness someone severely injured and they start saying they feel very warm, very tired, or that they just want to sleep, take it seriously. Keep talking to them. Encourage them to keep their eyes open. Let emergency responders know immediately. Shock does not always look dramatic at first. Sometimes it looks like someone who simply wants to rest. From the perspective of a trauma nurse, those moments are some of the most intense. Watching a patient begin to slip, knowing what that means, and fighting to pull them back with words and stimulation until definitive treatment can be provided. The human body is incredibly resilient, but it has limits. Severe blood loss pushes those limits quickly. That warm and cozy feeling is not a sign that things are okay. It is a red flag. And if someone in scrubs is raising their voice at you in that moment, telling you to keep your eyes open, it is because they are doing everything they can to prevent your heart from stopping. Staying awake can be the difference between survival and something far worse. It is not dramatic advice. It is practical reality from people who see it happen every day. When I think about that night now, it still makes my chest tighten a little. It began like any other Friday. My husband and I were at home with our dog, easing into the weekend. We rented a small house with a modest yard that had clearly not been a priority for our landlord. The grass was uneven, the soil was patchy, and small repairs were often delayed. He was the kind of landlord who preferred the cheapest option for everything. He had hired a woman as a groundskeeper to handle yard work. She was not a trained landscaper. From what we understood, she was struggling financially and needed work, and he hired her cheaply to do digging, planting, and general upkeep. I remember feeling uneasy about the arrangement. It was not that I looked down on her. Everyone deserves work and stability. But there is a difference between someone trimming bushes and someone digging into the ground where utility lines run. That Friday evening, I heard shouting outside. It was not normal complaining or someone muttering under their breath. It was loud, frantic, and full of panic. I moved toward the window and could hear her yelling into her phone. She kept saying, "Don't come out here," over and over, her voice sharp and strained. That was when I smelled it. If you have ever smelled natural gas, you know there is nothing subtle about it. It hits instantly. It is sharp, chemical, and deeply wrong. It does not smell like something that belongs in open air. It feels like a warning before you even fully register what it is. The smell was strong enough that I did not hesitate for a second. I grabbed my dog immediately. I did not stop to find proper shoes or gather anything else. I just moved. I stepped outside and away from the house as quickly as I could. My heart was racing so hard, I could feel it in my throat. Every breath carried that sharp scent, and it made my anxiety spike. The groundskeeper was pacing in the yard, still on her phone, clearly overwhelmed. I asked what happened, and through broken explanations and panic, she said she had hit something while digging. She had struck a gas line. No one had called to mark utility lines before digging. No checks had been done. She had simply started digging into the yard, and the shovel connected with something it absolutely should not have. Gas was actively leaking into the ground around our house. I immediately called the landlord. I expected urgency. I expected him to say, "See, get away from the house right now. I'm calling the gas company." Instead, he told me to calm down. He said he would call XL to fix it on Monday. It was Friday night. He said that until then, the groundskeeper would patch it up temporarily. He made it sound like a minor issue, something that could wait a few days. He claimed he did not want her to get into trouble, but it was clear what was really going on. Emergency calls cost money. Weekend repairs cost money. He did not want to deal with the expense. I was stunned. The smell was still strong. It was not fading. Gas was actively seeping into the soil around our home. The idea of waiting until Monday felt insane. My husband overheard the conversation and stepped in immediately. He did not argue. He did not debate. He simply said no. He picked up his phone and called 911. That decision likely saved us. Emergency crews arrived quickly, and their response was nothing like the landlord's calm dismissal. They treated it as serious from the moment they stepped out of their vehicles. They brought equipment and began testing the area right away. They confirmed what we already knew. There was immediate danger. The leak was not small, and it was not something that could be taped or temporarily covered. They started digging up the yard to access the damaged line. The scene was chaotic but controlled. Flashing lights reflected off torn soil and wet grass. Then they found something that made everything even more frightening. An underground pocket of gas had already formed. Gas does not always disperse evenly. It can collect beneath the surface, especially in soil conditions that trap it. That buildup creates a concentrated pocket, and if it ignites, the explosion can be devastating. The firefighters explained that all it would have taken was a spark, flipping a light switch, a static discharge, a pilot light from a water heater, a car starting nearby. Even something small could have triggered it. Just minutes earlier, we had been inside that house, unaware that gas was accumulating beneath us. Our dog had been walking around the living room. We had been planning a normal weekend evening. The thought of how close we came still makes me feel sick. The emergency crew made it clear that this was not something that could wait. It was not safe to delay until Monday. It was not safe to allow anyone untrained to patch a gas line. Professional repair was required immediately. We stood at a distance, I watching as they tore up our yard. It was dark by then, and the air still carried a faint chemical smell mixed with damp soil. I felt shaken, not just by the danger itself, but by how casually our landlord had tried to dismiss it. He had been more concerned about money than about the risk to our lives. Once everything was repaired and the area was deemed safe, the firefighters talked to us about how unpredictable gas leaks can be. They explained that underground pockets are particularly dangerous because they are invisible. You cannot see them forming. You cannot hear them building. Sometimes the only sign is that sharp smell. Later that night, when we were finally allowed back inside, the house felt different. It no longer felt fully safe. It felt fragile. I kept imagining what could have happened if I had ignored the smell. If I had assumed it would fade. If we had listened to the landlord and waited until Monday. I replayed the sequence over and over in my head. The shouting, the smell, the phone call, the decision to call 911. It is unsettling to realize how much danger can exist quietly and invisibly. Gas leaking into soil does not look dramatic. There are no flashing warning signs, just a smell. And sometimes that smell is the only warning you get. That experience changed how I view safety issues completely. I no longer worry about overreacting when something feels wrong. I do not care about inconvenience. I do not care about someone being embarrassed or getting in trouble. If there is even a possibility of serious danger, it gets reported immediately. The yard was destroyed for weeks after that. It took time to repair the damage. but I would choose a torn-up yard over an explosion every single time. Looking back, I am grateful for two things. First, that I trusted my instincts the moment I smelled gas. Second, that my husband refused to let a landlord's financial concerns override our safety. That Friday night could have ended in a completely different way. And sometimes survival comes down to recognizing a smell and refusing to wait until Monday. I work at an animal hospital, specifically in the oncology department, but the hospital itself is much larger than just cancer care. We are a specialty facility with a level 1 trauma center for dogs and cats. In my area, we are basically the equivalent of a major referral center in human medicine. When a general practice vet encounters something complicated, critical, or advanced, the patient often ends up with us. We handle everything from emergency surgeries to advanced cancer treatments. I am not a veterinarian, and I am not a certified veterinary technician. I work as a pharmacy technician, and one of my primary responsibilities is drawing up chemotherapy for oncology patients. It is very precise work. Every dose has to be calculated carefully based on weight, protocol, and blood work. But there is no room for mistakes when you are handling chemotherapy drugs. Working in oncology has taught me something that most people outside of medicine would never think about. Certain diseases have a smell. It sounds strange if you have never experienced it, but it is very real. One of the most noticeable examples in veterinary medicine, at least in my experience, is lymphoma. I cannot fully describe the smell in a way that would make sense to someone who has never encountered it. It is not exactly sweet. It is not exactly sour. It is not rot. It is not infection. It is something different. When lymphoma progresses into later stages, some animals begin to give off a distinct odor. It is subtle at first, but once you recognize it, you cannot ignore it. It clings lightly to their fur and skin. It is not always present in early disease, but when it is there, it is unmistakable. There have been times when a new patient walks into the oncology department for evaluation, and before staging is even complete, before cytology or biopsy results confirm anything, I can smell it. I will not say anything out loud because diagnostics always come first. But in the back of my mind, I already suspect lymphoma. Later, when the results come in, they often confirm what my nose had already hinted at. It is not magic. It is not intuition in a mystical sense. It is pattern recognition. When you are exposed to certain conditions repeatedly, your brain starts to associate subtle sensory cues with outcomes. Over time, those cues become easier to identify. Before veterinary medicine, I worked in human health care. I spent time in retail pharmacy and in long-term care settings. I delivered medications to nursing homes regularly. That environment taught me something similar. There is a smell associated with C. diff infections. If someone has had long-term antibiotic use and develops a C. difficile infection, the odor can be overwhelming. It is sharp, sour, and deeply unpleasant. Once you have encountered it, you recognize it instantly. It is one of those smells that lingers in your memory. Renal failure also has a smell. When kidney disease becomes severe, waste products build up in the body. The breath can take on a distinctive odor, sometimes described as metallic or ammonia-like. It is not subtle when the disease is advanced. You can walk into a room and know something is wrong before lab results are even reviewed. Even in psychiatry, there can be noticeable differences. Some patients with severe mental health conditions, especially when hygiene is poor or medications alter metabolism, can develop distinctive body odors. It is not always the illness itself. Sometimes it is the combination of stress, self-neglect, and biological changes. Having a sensitive sense of smell is both a gift and a burden in medical settings. On one hand, it can help you pick up on changes early. It adds another layer of awareness. You notice when something is off. You can sometimes identify a complication before it becomes obvious to others. On the other hand, it can be frustrating. There have been many times when I have mentioned that something smells different or concerning, and people around me have shrugged it off. They say they do not notice anything. They assume I am being overly sensitive. Sometimes it takes hours, or even days, before someone else smells it too and finally acknowledges it. By then, I am usually thinking, I told you so, but you cannot rely solely on smell in medicine. It is one piece of information among many. Diagnostics, lab values, imaging, and clinical signs always matter more than instinct. Still, it is interesting how often the body communicates through scent. Cancer changes metabolism. It alters cellular activity. It affects how proteins break down and how waste products are processed. Those changes can influence the way an animal smells. We do not always understand the exact chemical pathways behind it, but the pattern is there. In oncology, especially in advanced disease, there is sometimes a quiet heaviness that comes with it. The smell is just one part of that picture. It is not something dramatic or overwhelming every time, but when it is present, it feels like a subtle warning. Working in both human and veterinary medicine has made me more aware of how interconnected our senses are with health. Sight and touch are obvious tools, but smell is often overlooked. There is research showing that certain diseases produce specific volatile organic compounds. Dogs have been trained to detect cancer through scent. Humans are not nearly as sensitive as dogs, but some people do pick up on subtle differences. Sometimes I wonder how many healthcare professionals rely quietly on their sense of smell without openly discussing it. It is not always part of formal training, but it becomes part of lived experience. The difficult part is that smells associated with illness are rarely pleasant. They can linger in your mind long after you leave work. There are days when I can still faintly recall the scent of a severe C. diff infection or the particular odor of advanced lymphoma in a dog that did not respond to treatment. It stays with you, but it also deepens your respect for the body and its complexity. The human body and the bodies of animals communicate in ways we are still learning to understand. Chemistry, bacteria, metabolism, inflammation, organ failure, cancer, all of it can leave traces in the air. Having a sensitive nose means I notice more than most people. Sometimes that is helpful. Sometimes it makes environments overwhelming. It can be frustrating when people dismiss what I detect. But over time, I have learned to trust that awareness without overreacting to it. It is just another tool. Medicine is not only about lab values and imaging, it is also about observation, subtle changes, small differences, patterns, and sometimes before the blood work confirms it, before the biopsy results return, before the chart is updated, the air itself carries a quiet clue that something serious is happening. Once you recognize it, you cannot unrecognize it. There is a certain smell that once you experience it, you never forget. It is not the fresh chill of cold air inside an ice rink. It is not the rubber scent from skate mats or the faint chemical trace of routine cleaning supplies. This smell is sharper, more aggressive. It hits the back of your nose and almost feels like it scratches on the way in. Your eyes may sting. Your throat might tighten without you even realizing it at first. Some people compare it to chlorine, but that comparison does not quite capture it. It is harsher than pool water. It has an edge that feels wrong. That smell can signal real danger. Many ice rinks rely on industrial refrigeration systems to keep the ice frozen. A common choice for these systems is ammonia because it is highly effective and efficient for large-scale cooling. Under normal circumstances, the ammonia is contained inside sealed pipes and machinery. You would never know it was there. It does its job quietly in the background, but if something fails, even briefly, the consequences can change very quickly. Ammonia has an extremely strong and recognizable odor. It is not subtle. In small amounts, it burns your nose and makes your eyes water. In larger concentrations, it can irritate your lungs and reduce the amount of breathable oxygen in the air. In extreme situations, it can become life-threatening. It is not something to shrug off or assume will pass. I learned that in a way I will never forget. One evening, I was at a golf driving range that happened to sit downhill from a local ice rink. It was one of those quiet, calm evenings where the air feels cool and still. The range lights were on, and people were casually practicing their swings. You could hear the soft thud of golf balls and occasional laughter. Nothing felt out of place. At first, I noticed something drifting down the hill from the direction of the rink. It looked like fog rolling toward us. That alone did not seem alarming. Cool air and refrigeration equipment can sometimes create visible mist. I had seen that before around cold buildings, but this was different. The cloud did not behave like steam or warm fog. It did not rise and dissipate. It sank. It hugged the ground and rolled steadily downhill. It was thicker than normal mist, almost heavy-looking. Then the smell reached us. It was immediate and powerful, sharp, chemical. It made me instinctively turn my head away. My eyes began to water. My throat felt tight. See, it was not the scent of smoke or something burning. It smelled artificial, like industrial cleaner, mixed with something metallic and biting. Within seconds, I noticed that my breathing felt slightly off. It was subtle at first, like the air was thinner or heavier than it should have been. I was not gasping, but it did not feel normal either. Other people started reacting too. Conversations stopped. People lowered their clubs and looked toward the hill. Someone nearby said it smelled like chlorine, but that explanation did not sit right. There was no pool, and this was stronger than any pool smell I had ever encountered. That was when instinct took over. The cloud was clearly moving downhill. Gases that are heavier than air can settle and flow along the ground, especially in cooler conditions. We were positioned directly in its path. If you ever find yourself in a situation like that, the safest move is simple. Go uphill immediately. Do not wait to confirm what it is. Do not assume someone else will handle it. Do not stand there debating whether it is dangerous. If a chemical smell is strong enough to irritate your eyes and throat, and you can see a cloud moving toward you, leave. We moved quickly uphill, away from the drifting cloud. The difference was noticeable almost immediately. The further we got from it, the easier it became to breathe. The air felt clearer. My eyes stopped burning. Emergency responders arrived shortly after. Fire trucks and personnel blocked off the area around the rink. It turned out there had been a leak in the refrigeration system. The white cloud was not harmless fog. It was ammonia gas escaping into the air. Firefighters later explained that even moderate exposure can cause serious irritation to the respiratory system. In higher concentrations, ammonia can damage lung tissue and displace oxygen. The fact that the gas was rolling downhill made the situation especially risky for anyone in low-lying areas. The driving range was directly below the rink. If people had stayed in place or moved downhill out of confusion, they would have moved deeper into the concentrated gas. That could have led to severe breathing problems or worse. What unsettled me most was how quickly the situation developed. 1 minute it was an ordinary evening. The next, a chemical cloud was drifting toward us. The visual of it still stays with me. A white mist creeping slowly down a hill, quiet and almost calm looking, but carrying something hazardous inside it. Since that night, I have paid much closer attention to strong chemical smells in public places, especially near facilities that use refrigeration systems. Ice rinks, cold storage warehouses, and certain industrial buildings often rely on ammonia-based systems. Most of the time, they are completely safe, but when something goes wrong, you will likely know because of that unmistakable odor. The warning signs are straightforward: a sharp, chlorine-like chemical smell that feels too strong for the setting, a visible white cloud that sinks and spreads rather than rising, irritation in your eyes, nose, or throat, a subtle but real sense that breathing feels more difficult. If you ever notice those signs, trust them. Create distance immediately. Move uphill if possible. Get to fresh air. Once you are safe, call emergency services and report what you observed. Do not attempt to investigate or confirm the source yourself. Industrial systems are designed with safety measures, but no system is perfect. Mechanical failures happen, valves break, seals fail. When they do, time matters. What I took away from that experience is simple. Your body often reacts before your brain fully processes what is happening. If your eyes burn and your throat tightens, that is not random. It is a signal. Do not debate it. Do not downplay it. Move away. Find clean air. Get higher ground. Sometimes the difference between a close call and a tragedy is just a few seconds of instinctive action. And sometimes the most important warning you will ever receive is carried on the air itself. I never realized how much information my body was trying to give me. I grew up thinking digestion was just something that happened in the background. You eat, you go to the bathroom, you move on with your day. It did not seem complicated. It did not seem important. Looking back now, I can see that my body had been trying to get my attention for years. I have what is called a redundant colon. That basically means my colon has extra loops and twists. Instead of being shaped in a simple, efficient way, it has additional curves that make it easier for waste to get stuck. I did not know that for a long time. All I knew was that my digestion felt slow, and I had some habits that I thought were almost funny. Growing up, I used to joke that I had found a cheat code to being human because I barely went to the bathroom. I could go nearly 2 weeks without having a bowel movement. At the time, I thought that was convenient. It meant I did not have to deal with it often. I did not realize that what felt like a shortcut was actually a serious problem. I was chronically underweight. No matter how much I tried to eat, I struggled to gain weight. I rarely felt hungry. Food did not excite me the way it seemed to for other people. I would get full quickly and stay full for a long time. It seemed like my appetite was just naturally small. The truth was much more physical than I understood at the time. When I eventually started getting colonics, everything changed. For anyone unfamiliar, a colonic is a procedure that helps flush out the colon. I was nervous the first time. I did not know what to expect, but I was also desperate to feel better. My digestion had become uncomfortable, and I needed answers. The first colonic I had was shocking. After the procedure, I weighed myself and realized I had lost 7 pounds. 7 pounds. That meant there had been 7 pounds of waste sitting inside me. It was not just a little bit of buildup. It was significant. When you think about that, it changes how you see your body. I had been carrying around that weight internally, and it was affecting everything. No wonder I was not hungry. No wonder I felt full all the time. My digestive system was backed up in ways I had not understood. Because waste was sitting there so long, I was not absorbing nutrients properly. My body could not function the way it was meant to when everything was slowed down and stuck in those twists and turns. It felt like I had been encased in my own blockage. After that, I went through a hospital stay and a colonoscopy to better understand what was happening. That was when I learned about my redundant colon more clearly. The extra length and loops were contributing to the severe constipation and slow movement. Eventually, I was prescribed Linsis, and I honestly cannot overstate how life-changing that medication has been for me. For the first time in years, I was able to have regular bowel movements without extreme discomfort. I started feeling hunger in a normal way. I could eat without feeling painfully full all the time. My body began absorbing nutrients more effectively. I started gaining weight in a healthy way. My energy improved. My mood improved. It is wild how much your digestive system affects every other part of your life. One of the strangest parts of this journey has been learning to pay attention to smells in a way I never had before. It might sound awkward to talk about, but there is real information there. I can often tell when I need to adjust my diet based on changes in odor. If something smells unusually strong or different, it usually means something in my gut environment has shifted. It has also made me more aware of hormonal patterns. As a woman, I have noticed that my digestion changes slightly around my menstrual cycle. I can sometimes tell that my period is coming based on subtle shifts in my bowel movements and even the smell. Hormones affect everything, including digestion. It feels strange to say that I have relearned how to poop at 30 years old, but that is honestly what it feels like. I spent so many years thinking that barely going was normal for me. Now I understand that regular elimination is not optional, it is essential. There was another experience that really drove home how much your body can signal danger through smell. The first time I had a serious allergic reaction, I did not recognize it right away. I had only ever experienced mild reactions before, like rashes. I did not expect anything more severe. Before my face and airways started swelling, before the more obvious signs appeared, I noticed something else. The smell changed dramatically. It was the same kind of extreme, almost alarming odor I had come to associate with internal distress. It was intense enough that it made me pause. At the time, I did not fully connect it to the allergic reaction. I did not immediately realize that my body was entering a dangerous state, but after that experience, I understood that sudden, extreme digestive changes can sometimes signal systemic stress. Now, if I ever experience that kind of intense shift again, alongside other symptoms, I know not to ignore it. I know to take antihistamines quickly and seek help if needed. It is not about panic, it is about awareness. Looking back, I realize how much I misunderstood my own body growing up. I thought avoiding the bathroom was convenient. I thought not feeling hungry was just how I was built. I did not see the connection between digestion and overall health. Now I see it clearly. The gut is central to everything. It affects nutrient absorption, energy, immune responses, hormone balance, and even mental clarity. When your colon is not functioning properly, it does not just stay a local issue. It ripples outward into every part of your life. It can feel embarrassing to talk openly about digestion, especially in cultures where it is considered private or awkward. But the reality is that paying attention to these signals can change your health completely. My life now feels entirely different from what it did before I addressed these issues. I can eat and feel hungry. I can maintain a healthy weight. I have more energy. I do not feel constantly bloated or backed up. The improvement in quality of life is huge. If someone had told me years ago that something as basic as learning how to have regular bowel movements would transform my life, I probably would not have believed them, but it did. The body communicates in many ways. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it sends louder signals. For me, smell became one of those signals. Not something to be embarrassed about, but something to learn from. It is strange and almost funny How much information can come from something most people try not to think about? But once you start listening, you realize your body has been talking to you all along. When I was a kid, my friends and I spent almost every free afternoon riding our bikes through the wooded trails that cut between neighborhoods. They were not official paths, just narrow dirt tracks worn down over time by kids like us. They ran through drainage channels, behind fences, and between clusters of trees that separated one street from another. If you grew up in a suburban area, you probably know exactly the kind of place I mean. It felt hidden from adults, like a world that belonged to us. Those trails were freedom. We would race down slopes, skid through loose gravel, and see who could take the sharpest turns without falling. We would stop in random clearings just to sit and talk about school, music, or whatever drama was happening that week. There were no phones constantly buzzing, no schedules to keep, no real responsibilities, just bikes, dirt, scraped knees, and long stretches of daylight. There was one part of the trail that passed behind a house that stood slightly apart from the others. Most of the houses in that area were packed fairly close together, but this one sat a bit farther back. It had a narrow yard and an old wooden fence that looked weathered compared to the newer homes around it. We rarely paid much attention to it. It was simply part of our usual route, a familiar backdrop that we rode past without thinking. Then one afternoon, everything shifted. We were riding as usual, joking around and pedaling fast when the smell hit us. It was not gradual, it was sudden and heavy. One second we were laughing, and the next we were slowing down without even discussing it. The smell was strong enough to cut through the outdoor air, which says a lot. When you spend a lot of time outside, you get used to certain unpleasant scents. We had all smelled dead animals before. A squirrel, maybe a raccoon, something small that had not made it across the road. Those smells are sharp and unpleasant, but familiar. This was different. It was thicker. It felt like it clung to the air instead of drifting away. It made you instinctively breathe through your mouth, even though that did not help much. I remember slowing my bike almost without thinking. The others did the same. No one said anything right away, but we all exchanged looks. You could see the same expression on every face. Confusion mixed with discomfort. Something about it felt wrong on a deeper level. One of my friends tried to lighten the mood with a joke. He said it smelled like something crawled under that house and died. We laughed, but it was not genuine laughter. It was the kind you use when something makes you uneasy and you are trying to pretend it does not. We lingered near the back of that house for a minute or two, trying to figure out where the smell was strongest. It seemed concentrated around that property. There were no open windows that we could see, no visible signs of anything unusual, no movement at all. The house looked normal, but the smell did not match normal. Eventually, we decided to move on. The discomfort started outweighing our curiosity. We rode farther down the trail, and after a short distance, the smell faded. But the mood had already changed. A few blocks away, we stopped at one of my friends' houses, like we often did. Now, we leaned our bikes against the driveway and gathered in the kitchen, still talking about what we had just experienced. Again, the jokes came first. That is what kids do when they do not know how to handle something serious. We joked that we had probably just discovered a dead body. We laughed about it like we were characters in some kind of crime show. But underneath that joking tone, there was an unspoken understanding that something was off. Eventually, we told my friend's parents about it. We did not expect much. We figured they would say it was probably a dead animal under the porch or in the yard. But as we described the smell, their reactions changed. They did not laugh. They asked questions. Where exactly was it? Was it strong? Did it smell like an animal or something worse? How long had it been there? Then they called 911. That was when it started to feel serious. We stood quietly in the kitchen as my friend's mom calmly explained to the dispatcher that there was a strong odor near a house where an elderly woman lived alone. She was not dramatic about it. She just reported what we had said. The rest of the day felt different. The earlier excitement of riding through the trails was gone. There was a weight in the air that had not been there before. Later, we learned what had happened. The elderly woman who lived in that house had passed away inside. She lived alone and no one had realized she had died. It was only after we reported the smell that authorities went to check on her. Hearing that changed everything. The jokes we made earlier suddenly felt wrong. The line about discovering a dead body was no longer a joke. It was reality. That shift from humor to truth was uncomfortable in a way I was not prepared for. I remember thinking about how close we had been to something tragic without knowing it. We were just kids riding our bikes, enjoying an ordinary afternoon. We were not searching for anything serious. We just happened to pass by at the right time. What has stayed with me more than anything else is that smell. It is difficult to describe to someone who has never experienced it, but I believe most people recognize it instantly once they do. There is something about the scent of human decomposition that feels fundamentally different from anything else. It is not just unpleasant, it triggers something deeper, almost like your brain identifies it before you consciously understand what it is. I believe there is truth to the idea that we are wired to recognize it. Maybe it is an evolutionary survival instinct. Our ancestors needed to avoid disease and contamination. Perhaps our brains developed a strong reaction to that specific scent for a reason. Even now, years later, I am certain that if I ever encountered it again, I would know immediately. At the time, we had no prior experience with anything like that. We were just kids, carefree and focused on fun. But in that moment, something shifted in all of us. We felt it at the same time. That subtle transition from playful energy to quiet awareness. It also made me think about how easily someone can fade into the background when they live alone. That woman had likely been in that house for years. We had ridden past it countless times without giving it much thought. She was simply part of the neighborhood landscape. And then one day, the only sign that something was wrong was a smell drifting through the trees. That realization has stayed with me. It made the world feel slightly heavier. Not dramatically so, but in a quiet, thoughtful way. It reminded me that life can end without warning, and sometimes without immediate notice. Eventually, we went back to riding our bikes. Kids are resilient. We returned to racing down hills and joking around. But I do not think any of us completely forgot that afternoon. Sometimes I still remember the way we looked at each other when the smell first hit. No one needed to explain it. No one had to say the words out loud. We just knew something was wrong. It was one of those moments that subtly shifts how you see the world. You realize that beneath ordinary days and familiar streets, there are realities you cannot unlearn once you encounter them, and that smell is one of them. Once you recognize it, you never forget it. That afternoon started out so ordinary that it almost feels strange to think about how quickly it changed. I had gone out for a walk, something I had done countless times before. The sky was overcast, but it did not look dangerous. Where I live, storms can build quickly, but you get used to judging the clouds and convincing yourself you have enough time. I remember glancing up and thinking I would finish my usual route before the rain really began. About halfway through my walk, the atmosphere shifted in a way that made my instincts tighten. The light changed first. What had been a dull gray sky took on a faint green tint that felt unnatural. The air became heavy and still for a moment, almost like the world was holding its breath. Then the wind picked up abruptly, strong enough to push against me. Within minutes, rain started falling hard. It was not the kind of rain that builds gradually. It came down fast and thick, soaking me almost instantly. My shirt clung to my skin, and water ran down my face, making it hard to see. I lowered my head and started walking faster, hoping to beat the worst of it. Then the thunder began. Not distant, rolling thunder that sounds far away and harmless. These were sharp, explosive cracks that felt close enough to rattle my chest. Each one seemed to hit just a little too near for comfort. I thought about turning around, but I was already a good distance from home. I figured if I moved quickly, I could make it back before things got worse. That was when I felt something I had never felt before. A strange static sensation spread across the top of my head. It felt almost identical to when you rub a balloon on fabric and then bring it close to your hair. My scalp tingled sharply like tiny sparks were dancing along it. It was not painful, but it was intense and unnatural. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, just long enough for a confused thought to flash through my mind. What is that? Before I could even fully process the question, everything exploded in white. A lightning bolt struck the ground less than a meter in front of me. I was staring straight into it when it happened. The brightness was overwhelming, so bright that it felt like my vision had been swallowed by pure white light. There were faint hints of blue inside the flash, but mostly it was blinding. For a split second, it felt like the entire world had been erased and replaced with light. The sound came at the same time. It was not just loud, it was violent. It felt like pressure slamming into my body from every direction. My ears hurt instantly as if something had burst inside them. The thunder did not feel like noise. It felt like impact. I did not get knocked off my feet. I did not collapse. Somehow, I remained standing, but I knew immediately that something had passed through me. The bolt had not struck me directly, but it hit so close that the electrical current traveled through the ground and into my body. My heart began racing uncontrollably. It was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. My ears rang with a high, piercing tone that cut through the sound of the rain. My legs felt strange, buzzing and prickling at the same time. It was not exactly pain. It was more like thousands of tiny needles vibrating under my skin. For several seconds, I stood completely frozen. The rain kept pouring down as if nothing extraordinary had happened. The world looked the same, but it did not feel the same. The air smelled faintly burnt. I looked down at the spot where the lightning had struck. The ground was darkened and slightly smoking. I took a careful step forward, unsure whether my legs would support me. They felt unsteady, almost numb, but also itchy from the inside. My entire body felt unnaturally warm, which was strange because I was soaked in cold rain. The warmth was not on the surface of my skin. It felt internal, like I was immersed in a warm liquid that wrapped around me from head to toe. I managed to walk home slowly. Each step felt deliberate. I was hyper-aware of my body. My heart rate gradually slowed, but the ringing in my ears stayed. Once inside, I changed into dry clothes and sat down, trying to calm myself. About an hour later, the headache began. It was not like a normal headache from stress or dehydration. It felt deep and heavy, almost like heat radiating from inside my skull. The warmth I had felt in my body seemed to gather behind my eyes. The pain spread in a way that made my stomach feel uneasy. Waves of nausea came and went. It was a sickening internal heat that lasted for 3 full days. The next morning, something else felt off. I got out of bed and walked to my door. When I reached for the handle, I completely missed it. My hand stopped several inches short. I blinked, confused, and tried again. I missed a second time before adjusting. That was when I realized my depth perception was wrong. Objects did not seem where they were supposed to be. Distances felt slightly distorted. Walking required more attention than usual. I had to focus carefully on where I placed my feet. Stairs felt risky, so I avoided them. Even simple tasks like pouring water into a glass required more concentration than they normally would. It was like my brain and eyes were not fully communicating. The world looked normal, but my sense of space was slightly misaligned. That lasted for a few days before gradually correcting itself. I also noticed a small physical reminder of what had happened. The tip of my nose felt sore. When I touched it, the skin was tender. It was not a severe burn, but the heat from the lightning had been intense enough to slightly scorch it. For days, that small soreness served as proof that it had not just been in my head. The warm, fuzzy sensation throughout my body lingered longer than I expected. Even when the headache started to fade, I would occasionally notice that same low hum in my muscles. It felt like a faint electrical afterglow, like my body had not fully discharged from whatever had passed through it. Looking back now, I understand how serious it could have been. Lightning is unpredictable and incredibly powerful. A direct strike can stop a heart instantly. Even ground current injuries can cause internal damage, neurological problems, and lasting complications. The fact that I stayed on my feet and remained conscious feels almost unreal. At the time, though, I was mostly confused. I kept asking myself how something so violent could happen inches in front of me, and yet I was still standing. Later, I learned that the static sensation I felt on my head is something some people report just before a lightning strike. It happens when electrical charge builds in the air and on the ground. In that moment, my body was part of that electrical field. What unsettles me most is how little warning there was. 2 seconds of tingling, that was it. No countdown, no clear signal to run, just a brief prickling sensation and then blinding light. For days afterward, I felt fragile. I replayed the moment over and over in my mind. The flash, the sound, the smell, the feeling in my legs, the ringing in my ears. It made me realize how exposed we are during storms. You can be walking along, thinking about nothing in particular, and in an instant, nature reminds you how small and vulnerable you really are. Now, whenever I hear thunder close by, I do not hesitate. I seek shelter immediately. I no longer assume I have time. That experience changed the way I respect storms. The human body can survive incredible things, but electricity is not something to underestimate. I was incredibly lucky, close enough to be injured, but not close enough to be killed. Sometimes I still think about that moment when everything turned white. There was something surreal about staring directly into a lightning strike. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. And the strangest part is that I remained standing as if nothing had happened, while my body quietly absorbed the shock of it. It took days for my vision to settle, days for the headache to fade, days for the warmth in my body to finally disappear. But that flash of light and the 2 seconds of warning that came before it will stay with me for the rest of my life. When I was told that I needed to have my gallbladder removed, I honestly thought the surgery itself would be the hardest part. I prepared myself mentally for the hospital visit, the anesthesia, the soreness afterward, and the temporary disruption to my routine. I had read that gallbladder removal is one of the most common surgeries performed in the United States and other Western countries. People get it done all the time. Most recover quickly. Many go back to normal life within weeks. That gave me comfort. What I did not fully understand at the time was how much that small organ had quietly been doing for me every single day. The gallbladder is not large. It is not an organ most people think about until something goes wrong. But it plays a specific and important role. It stores bile produced by the liver and releases it when you eat, especially when you eat fat. That burst of bile helps break down dietary fats so they can be properly digested and absorbed. It is a simple system, but it is efficient. Without a gallbladder, the liver still makes bile. That part does not stop. The difference is that there is no longer a reservoir to store and release it in a controlled, concentrated way. Instead of getting a timed surge when you eat, bile trickles continuously into the small intestine. For some people, that adjustment happens smoothly. For others, the digestive system struggles for a while. I turned out to be in the second category. After the surgery, I expected soreness around the incision sites. I expected to move carefully for a few days. I expected maybe some mild digestive changes. What I did not expect was that my entire digestive system would feel like it had to relearn how to function from the ground up. The first time I ate what used to be a completely normal meal for me, I realized something was off. Within an hour, I felt bloated and uncomfortable. There was cramping, there was urgency. It was not subtle, it was not mild. It was immediate and very clear that my body was not processing food the same way it had before. At first, I assumed it was just part of the early recovery phase. Surgery can temporarily slow digestion. Anesthesia can disrupt normal function. I told myself it would pass in a few days, but the pattern continued. Anything with even a moderate amount of fat would trigger digestive chaos. It did not have to be greasy fast food. Even something like a salad with dressing or a small portion of cheese could set things off. My system reacted quickly and aggressively. The most surprising part, and honestly the most distressing, was the change in smell. I will not go into graphic detail, but I can say that it was unmistakable and intense. It did not smell like ordinary digestive upset. It smelled wrong, stronger, sharper, almost chemical at times. It was the kind of smell that makes you pause and think, something is not functioning properly inside me. It felt like my body was not fully breaking down what I was eating. I later learned that when fats are not properly digested, due to insufficient bile concentration, they can move through the digestive tract in a different way. That can lead to loose stools, urgency, and noticeable changes in odor. At the time, though, I did not have that explanation fully in mind. All I knew was that my body had changed in a way I was not prepared for. The adjustment period was miserable. That is the most honest word I can use. It was not just about physical discomfort. It affected my confidence. It affected my willingness to leave the house without planning ahead. It affected how I thought about food, which used to be something simple and enjoyable. Digestive unpredictability can be exhausting. You start calculating everything. What did I eat? How much fat was in that? How long has it been since I last ate? If I leave now, will I regret it? You begin planning your day around access to a bathroom. You second-guess restaurant choices. You decline invitations because you are not sure how your body will react. There is also something deeply frustrating about not feeling in control of your own system. Before surgery, I had a rhythm. I understood how my body responded to meals. After surgery, that rhythm was gone. I began tracking patterns more carefully. It became very clear that fat was the primary trigger. The more fat in the meal, the stronger the reaction. That aligned with the physiology. Without a gallbladder, there was no concentrated bile release to efficiently handle larger amounts of dietary fat. Over time, I made adjustments. I reduced fat intake significantly. I avoided fried foods entirely. I paid attention to hidden fats in dressings, sauces, and snacks. I started reintroducing small amounts slowly to test tolerance. Gradually, things began to improve. The intense odor decreased first. Then the urgency became less severe. The cramping became more manageable. It was not an overnight transformation. It felt more like a slow recalibration. I read that the liver can increase bile production over time to compensate. The digestive tract may adapt to the continuous flow of bile. The body is remarkably resilient even when parts are removed. Still, the adjustment was not smooth. I want to be clear that I am not a doctor. I am simply sharing what I experienced. But the timing was impossible to ignore. The surgery happened. The digestive disruption followed almost immediately. As weeks passed and my body adapted, the severity decreased. That connection feels logical to me. I have also learned that post-gallbladder removal experiences vary widely. Some people report almost no digestive changes at all. Others struggle for months, though some need medication to help manage bile acid-related diarrhea. It is not a one-size-fits-all outcome. What this experience taught me is that the digestive system is more delicate and more interconnected than most of us realize. We tend to think of organs as isolated parts. Remove one and the rest simply keeps going. In reality, every part contributes to balance. The gallbladder may be small, but it plays a precise role. When it is gone, the body has to reorganize itself. I also learned not to dismiss major changes in my body. It is easy to assume that everything will just go back to normal. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it takes work, patience, and careful adjustment. If someone notices a sudden dramatic change in digestive odor or function after gallbladder surgery, it may very well be related to bile flow and fat digestion. That does not automatically mean something is dangerously wrong, but it does mean the body is adapting. It is worth monitoring. It is worth discussing with a healthcare provider if it persists or becomes severe, and it is worth being patient with yourself during the process. There were moments when I felt discouraged. I wondered if this was my new permanent normal, but slowly my system stabilized. I can now tolerate moderate amounts of fat without the extreme reactions I experienced at first. I still avoid heavy, greasy meals, but I no longer feel like my body is in constant chaos. The worst seems to be behind me. Going through this has made me more aware of how much we take for granted when everything is functioning smoothly. A small organ most people never think about was quietly helping me digest meals every day. When it was removed, I felt its absence immediately. It has also made me more attentive to my body's signals. When something changes dramatically and consistently, there is usually a reason. Sometimes that reason is temporary adjustment. Sometimes it requires medical attention. In my case, it appears my body simply needed time to learn a new way of processing food. It was uncomfortable. It was frustrating. It was, at times, embarrassing. But it was also a reminder that the human body can adapt in ways we do not always expect. Now, as things settle into a new normal, I feel a quiet appreciation for that resilience. The system may not function exactly the way it used to, but it functions. And after the chaos of those early weeks, that feels like a victory. When I was younger, around 15 or 16 years ago, body modification was not just something I liked. It was who I was. It shaped how I dressed, how I spent my time, and even who I surrounded myself with. The people I connected with were also into pushing boundaries, and we talked constantly about what was next. Piercings were common in our group. Stretched lobes were normal. Tattoos were almost expected. There was always this quiet question floating around: what is the next level? At that time in my life, body modification felt powerful. It felt like taking ownership of myself in a world that often felt controlling. For many of us, it was about more than appearance. It was about control, about expression, about testing what we could handle. Pain was not something to avoid. It was something to experience and manage. Now, branding was one of those topics that would come up in conversations late at night. It was considered extreme, but in a way that made it almost mythic. People talked about it with a mix of respect and curiosity. The idea seemed simple enough. A heated cauterizing tool, similar to a surgical instrument, would be pressed against the skin, creating a deliberate burn in a specific design. As it healed, it would scar permanently, leaving behind a raised mark that could never be removed. In those circles, branding was described almost artistically. It was framed as a form of commitment, something bold and symbolic. It was not mainstream, which made it feel even more appealing. There was something about choosing to carry a permanent scar that felt rebellious and intentional. I remember feeling curious about it long before I ever experienced it. See, I had already gone through the pain of multiple piercings. I thought I understood what it meant to endure discomfort for the sake of expression. Branding felt like the next step up, something that required more mental strength. What no one really talks about enough is the smell. There is a common comparison that burned human skin smells like pork. That description is not entirely wrong, but it is not perfect either. It is hard to describe accurately unless you have experienced it. It is thick and heavy. It lingers in the air. It is unmistakable. The first time I encountered that smell, it hit me immediately. I remember walking into the space and noticing it before I even fully processed what was happening. It was not like the faint scent of something cooking in a kitchen. It was sharper, more personal. A burned protein has a distinct odor that your brain does not confuse with anything else. What unsettles me now is how my brain reacted at the time. Instead of pulling back or feeling alarmed, I felt curious. It was a new sensory experience. I remember thinking that I had never smelled anything like it before. It felt novel rather than threatening. In hindsight, that reaction surprises me. The body naturally recoils from injury. But when you frame something as chosen, as meaningful, the brain interprets it differently. Context changes everything. The procedure itself was intense in a way that is difficult to compare to anything else. A third-degree burn is not a surface wound. It goes deep into the tissue. When the heated tool touched my skin, the sensation was immediate and sharp. It was not the quick, piercing sting I had grown used to. It was slower, heavier. It felt like the heat was sinking into me rather than just touching the surface. Adrenaline carried me through the moment. I focused on breathing steadily. I focused on staying still. Pain, when expected, can be managed in strange ways. Your body shifts into survival mode. You ride the wave instead of fighting it. But the moment the tool lifts away is not the end of the experience. It is just the beginning. Healing a third-degree burn is not simple. It is not quick. It does not behave like a clean cut or a neat puncture. The skin blisters. It leaks. It scabs unevenly. It itches in a way that feels relentless. The irritation can last for weeks. Every movement reminds you it is there. Clothing rubbing against it feels amplified. Sleeping requires careful positioning. You have to clean it regularly to prevent infection. There is a constant awareness of your body that does not fade until healing is well underway. In the first few days, there is pride. You look at it and think about the meaning behind it. It feels like proof of endurance, a visible mark that says you went through something intense and came out on the other side. But as the weeks stretch on, the reality of caring for a serious burn sets in. It is not glamorous, it is not dramatic in the way it is during the moment of branding. It is slow and inconvenient. It demands attention every single day. The smell during the actual branding stayed in my memory far longer than I expected. Even years later, certain faint scents can bring me back instantly. It is remarkable how powerful smell is when it comes to memory. It anchors you in time in a way that sight and sound often cannot. Looking back now, I can see how much of my mindset at the time was driven by intensity. I wanted experiences that felt sharp and unforgettable. Branding fit that desire perfectly. It was permanent, it was painful, it was outside the norm, but it was also serious tissue damage. That is something I understand much more clearly now. A third-degree burn is not a small thing. It is not a minor injury. In any other context, it would be treated as a medical emergency. Yet in that space, we approached it almost casually. Youth can blur the lines between risk and meaning. When you are searching for identity, for expression, for something that feels uniquely yours, you sometimes accept pain as part of the package. I do not look back with pure regret. That period of my life shaped me. It taught me resilience in some ways. It showed me how my body responds to trauma and healing. It forced me to care for a wound patiently and carefully, but I also see it through a more grounded lens now. I understand the risks better, the potential for infection, the long-term sensitivity of scar tissue, the way the body holds on to trauma even when it is self-inflicted. The weeks spent healing that burn taught me respect for my skin in a way I did not have before. Skin is not just a canvas. It is a living barrier that protects everything underneath. Damaging it deeply, even intentionally, carries consequences. When I think about that time now, I feel a strange mix of nostalgia and disbelief. Nostalgia for the fearless energy I had. Disbelief at how casually I treated something that intense. Curiosity can be powerful. It can make you lean toward things that might otherwise make you step back. When you combine curiosity with youth and a desire to push limits, you sometimes end up with experiences that stay with you permanently. For me, branding became one of those experiences. It is a chapter of my life that carries a scent I will never forget, a lesson about healing I did not expect to learn, and a reminder of how much perspective can change over time. Pardon the interruption for just a moment. I hope these stories are keeping you on the edge of your seat tonight. If you're finding yourself drawn to these dark accounts, I'd love to have you join us. If you're new here, please consider hitting that subscribe button. We share new true horror stories every single day, and being part of the community is the only way to make sure you never miss a nightmare. A quick like and a comment also means a lot. It really helps the shadows spread a little further. But for now, let's get back to it. The darkness is calling. There are certain smells that immediately trigger alarm in your brain. One of them is exhaust. Not the faint whiff you catch at a gas station or while driving, but the heavy, stale, trapped smell of engine fumes where they absolutely should not be. My husband and I learned just how serious that smell can be one winter night. We were asleep in our apartment when I suddenly woke up with a strange, uneasy feeling. At first, I thought it was just the dry winter air or maybe a weird dream. But then I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, just enough to make me wrinkle my nose. Within seconds, it became stronger. It smelled like car exhaust. Not fresh air, not someone cooking, not something burning in the kitchen. It was unmistakable. That thick, metallic, gassy odor that clings to the back of your throat. I nudged my husband awake and asked if he smelled it too. He sat up immediately and said yes. And as we both became fully alert, we realized something worse. The smell was getting stronger. When you are indoors, especially in the middle of the night, there are only a few places exhaust fumes could be coming from. And none of them are good. We jumped out of bed and started moving quickly. I opened the bedroom door and was hit with an even stronger wave of fumes. It felt heavy in the air. My head started to feel slightly off, like a dull pressure building behind my eyes. Carbon monoxide is odorless, but exhaust from engines carries other chemicals that absolutely are not. The danger is not just the smell, it is what you cannot smell. And that thought made my chest tighten. We started throwing open windows and doors as fast as we could. The problem was, it was below zero outside. Not just cold, freezing, the kind of cold that stings your face instantly. But we did not hesitate. We flung everything open. Front door, back door, every window we could access. Cold air rushed in like a wall. Within seconds, the apartment temperature dropped sharply, but at least the airflow started pushing the fumes out. We tried to figure out where it was coming from. We did not have a car running in a garage. We were not near a busy street. There was no obvious source. Then we heard it, the unmistakable high-pitched scream of a concrete saw. It was coming from below us. Our apartment building had a basement unit where the landlord's daughter lived. Apparently, there had been some kind of flooding issue down there. Instead of addressing it during normal hours, or at least notifying the rest of the building, the landlord showed up in the middle of the night with a gas-powered concrete saw to cut into the floor. And they never told us. They did not knock. They did not warn us. They did not consider that running a gas-powered tool in an enclosed lower-level space would send exhaust fumes directly upward into our unit. The way our apartment was structured, the fumes funneled straight into our living space. What they were doing downstairs was essentially filling our home with exhaust. I remember feeling a mix of fear and anger that is hard to describe. Fear because carbon monoxide poisoning can happen silently. People go to sleep and never wake up. Anger because this was completely avoidable. A simple knock on the door could have prevented it. A heads up would have allowed us to leave before the air became contaminated. Instead, we were scrambling half awake in the middle of the night, opening doors to freezing air and trying to clear out fumes we did not ask for. After we had opened everything, we realized the apartment was still not safe to stay in. The smell lingered heavily despite the crossbreeze. We could not just go back to bed and hope it dissipated quickly. So we grabbed blankets and went outside. Our car was not running. We were careful about that. We sat in it with the engine off, wrapped in coats and blankets, waiting for the fumes inside the apartment to clear. The cold crept in slowly. It was the early hours of the morning and the world was completely still. Sitting there watching our breath fog in the air, I kept thinking about how easily this could have gone differently. If we had slept more deeply, if we had dismissed the smell as something minor, if we had not reacted quickly. Carbon monoxide is often called the silent killer for a reason. It does not smell, it does not announce itself. Exhaust fumes, though, can be a warning sign that something dangerous is happening nearby. Eventually, the noise downstairs stopped. The saw was shut off. The smell gradually lessened as the fresh air continued to circulate through our apartment. We stayed in the car longer than necessary, just to be safe. When we finally went back inside, the air felt cleaner, but the apartment was freezing. It took hours to warm up again. The next day, I confronted the landlord. I could not understand how someone could run a gas-powered concrete saw in a basement apartment without thinking about ventilation, without checking on the other tenants, without even a courtesy knock. Their response was casual, almost dismissive. They seemed surprised we were upset. That made it worse. There is something deeply unsettling about realizing that your safety depended not just on your own actions, but on someone else's awareness. And that awareness was clearly lacking. Since that night, I am extremely sensitive to the smell of exhaust in enclosed spaces. If I ever catch even a hint of it indoors, my heart rate jumps instantly, because I remember that moment of waking up, half asleep, realizing the air was wrong. And I remember how quickly something ordinary can turn dangerous. It was just a maintenance job to them, but to us, it was a night spent opening windows into below-zero air and sitting in a freezing car, waiting to make sure we could breathe safely again. Some smells are not just unpleasant, they are warnings. And when you smell exhaust inside your home, that is not something you ignore. There are certain smells in this world that are not just unpleasant. They are warnings. They are signals that something invisible could be dangerous, even deadly. If you work around industrial systems, energy facilities, refrigeration plants, or chemical environments, you learn very quickly that your nose can be one of your most important safety tools. But you also learn something else that is far more unsettling. Sometimes the most dangerous chemicals stop smelling at all before they kill you. Hydrogen sulfide is one of those chemicals. In small amounts, hydrogen sulfide smells like rotten eggs. That smell is familiar to most people. It is the same odor you notice from spoiled eggs or certain types of flatulence. Natural gas companies add small amounts of sulfur-based compounds, often related to hydrogen sulfide chemistry, so that gas leaks are easier to detect. Natural gas by itself is odorless. Without additives, you would never know it was leaking. At low concentrations, hydrogen sulfide is easy to detect because it smells so terrible. It is sharp, sulfurous, and impossible to ignore. That is exactly why it is useful as a warning. But here is the dangerous part. At higher concentrations, hydrogen sulfide actually paralyzes your olfactory nerve. In other words, the gas disables your ability to smell it. You might detect it at first, and then suddenly the smell disappears. That does not mean the gas is gone. It means your nose has stopped working. That is what makes it so deadly. In industrial accidents where hydrogen sulfide is released in high concentrations, people sometimes describe smelling rotten eggs briefly and then nothing at all, within moments. Exposure can cause dizziness, loss of consciousness, respiratory failure, and death. The body is overcome before the brain fully processes what is happening. You can die without ever understanding what hit you. That is why, in professional settings, no one relies on smell alone. Gas detectors and proper respiratory protection are mandatory. Ammonia is another chemical that demands respect. Most large refrigeration facilities use ammonia because it is extremely efficient at removing heat. Ice rinks, cold storage warehouses, food processing plants, and industrial freezers often rely on ammonia-based systems. Under normal conditions, the ammonia is sealed inside pipes and compressors. You would never notice it, but if there is a leak, you will know. Ammonia has a piercing, overwhelming smell. It hits your nose like a punch. Your eyes water instantly. Your throat tightens. It feels like the air itself is attacking you. The easiest comparison is smelling salts, which paramedics use to jolt someone awake. Those release ammonia gas. Now imagine something far stronger. Household cleaners like Windex contain ammonia in a diluted water-bound form known as ammonium hydroxide. Even in that diluted state, the smell is unmistakable. Cat urine contains high levels of ammonia as well, which is why it has such a sharp odor. But industrial anhydrous ammonia is on a completely different level. Anhydrous ammonia means ammonia without water. In industrial quantities, it is extremely toxic. If a major release occurs, it can form a white vapor cloud that spreads quickly. That cloud is not harmless steam. It can cause severe chemical burns to the lungs, eyes, and skin. High exposure can lead to respiratory failure. If you ever smell ammonia in a facility that uses industrial refrigeration, it is never something to ignore. It is not normal. It is not harmless. It is a sign that something has gone wrong. I work as a safety specialist in a facility that uses both hydrogen sulfide and ammonia in different processes. That means my job is not only to understand the risks, but to prepare for them. The ammonia engine room in our facility is restricted access. Only the safety team and the HVAC specialists are allowed inside. It is not a place for casual entry. There are sensors, alarms, and strict protocols in place because the consequences of a major leak could be catastrophic. If there were ever a full-scale ammonia release, our evacuation plan extends 2 miles away from the facility. That is not an exaggeration. Industrial safety planning assumes worst-case scenarios because chemicals do not forgive mistakes. I once witnessed what happened when a tanker was refilling our ammonia system and spilled a very small amount. It was minor by industrial standards, but even that tiny release was overwhelming. The smell was so intense, it felt like standing in front of multiple tear gas canisters at once. My eyes burned immediately. My throat felt raw, and that was from what would be considered a small incident. Hydrogen sulfide is even more deceptive because it can disable your sense of smell at high concentrations. You cannot rely on your nose to save you. In environments where hydrogen sulfide is present, full-face respirators are required to enter certain areas. Gas detection monitors are mandatory. You treat every confined space as potentially lethal. What most people do not realize is how fast these gases can affect the body. High concentrations of hydrogen sulfide can cause collapse within seconds, and hydrous ammonia can overwhelm the respiratory system just as quickly. These are not slow, gradual dangers. They are immediate. That is why training matters. That is why procedures matter. That is why complacency is the enemy. When you work around these chemicals daily, you develop a deep respect for the invisible. You learn that just because you cannot see something does not mean it is harmless. You learn that a smell can be the difference between awareness and catastrophe. You also learn that your senses have limits. Hydrogen sulfide teaches you that smell can disappear when you need it most. Ammonia teaches you that when something smells aggressively wrong, it probably is. If you ever encounter a strong rotten egg smell in a place where gas lines are present, leave and report it immediately. If you ever smell sharp ammonia in a facility that uses refrigeration systems, notify someone and get to fresh air. Do not assume someone else will handle it. Do not assume it is minor. Chemicals do not care about assumptions. Working in safety has changed how I move through the world. I pay attention to ventilation. I notice strong odors immediately. I understand how quickly things can escalate when containment fails. Most days are routine. Systems work. Equipment is maintained. Alarms stay silent. That is how it should be. But the day something goes wrong, you do not get a second chance to react slowly, and sometimes the only early warning you have is carried in the air. There are certain dangers we grow up believing we would recognize instantly. The smell of gas inside your home is one of them. From childhood, we are told the same thing over and over again. If you smell gas, leave the house immediately. Do not flip any switches. Do not light candles. Do not try to investigate. Get outside and call the fire department. It sounds simple when you hear it in safety announcements. It feels obvious. You assume your brain would immediately sound the alarm. But real life does not always work in clean, dramatic moments. Sometimes danger moves slowly. Sometimes it blends into the background of everyday life. My sister-in-law and her husband experienced that in a way that still makes me uneasy when I think about it. They have a young child, the kind of child who is constantly exploring, curious hands, the endless energy. One afternoon, while they were busy with normal household tasks, their child wandered into the kitchen. Somehow, without anyone noticing, the child managed to turn one of the oven knobs just slightly. Not enough for the igniter to click loudly. Not enough to create a flame. Just enough for gas to begin leaking quietly into the room. It was such a small movement, Just a slight twist. No one noticed at first. Natural gas itself has no smell. Utility companies add a chemical compound to give it that distinct rotten egg odor, so leaks can be detected. In theory, it is unmistakable. You are supposed to recognize it right away. That sulfur-like smell is meant to be a clear warning, but the leak was slow. There was no loud hissing sound, no obvious visual cue. The gas seeped into the kitchen gradually. The smell likely started faint and subtle, and when something builds slowly, the brain often adapts. Cooking smells linger in kitchens. Trash can give off odors. Cleaning products have strong scents. Sometimes something spills and you do not immediately know what it is. Life inside a home is full of overlapping smells. It is easy to assume a strange scent is temporary. The afternoon passed. The gas continued to leak. Evening came. They went about their normal routine. Dinner, bath time, bedtime for the child. Maybe they noticed something in the air but could not quite place it. Maybe they thought it was coming from outside. Maybe they opened a window briefly and forgot about it. They went to sleep that night with gas continuing to fill their home. That part still scares me the most. They spent nearly 24 hours breathing in gas without understanding what was happening. That is not a short window. That is an entire day and night inside a space slowly filling with something that could have caused serious harm. The human nose adapts surprisingly quickly. When exposed to a smell for a long period, your sensitivity decreases. What seems strong at first can begin to feel normal. The brain filters it out. It becomes background. By the next morning, the gas had been leaking for almost a full day. My sister-in-law walked into the kitchen like she had done countless times before, and by pure chance, she looked directly at the oven knobs. One of them was slightly turned, not fully on, just enough. In that instant, everything clicked. The strange smell that had lingered, the slight heaviness in the air, the mild headache she had brushed off as stress or fatigue. It all made sense at once. She did not waste time. She turned the knob off immediately. She opened every window and door she could. She got fresh air moving through the house, and she called the fire department to report the leak. The firefighters arrived and checked the home thoroughly. They measured gas levels. They confirmed there had been a significant buildup. They made sure it was safe before anyone stayed inside. When she told me the story later, what unsettled me most was not just the prolonged exposure to gas. It was how close they came to something even worse. Gas leaks are dangerous because of inhalation risks. Prolonged exposure can cause headaches, dizziness, nausea, and in severe cases, suffocation. But the greater risk in many cases is ignition. It only takes a spark, a light switch being flipped on, a refrigerator cycling, a phone charger being plugged in, a candle being lit, even static electricity under the right conditions. When she said, "Thank God I didn't try to light a candle to get rid of the smell," I felt a chill. That reaction would have been completely normal. If your house smells bad, you reach for a candle. You spray air freshener. You try to mask it. That is instinct. If she had struck a match, the outcome could have been catastrophic. Entire houses have exploded because of gas accumulation combined with a single spark. Walls collapse. Windows shatter. Lives change in seconds. What makes this story so unsettling is how ordinary it began. There was no dramatic explosion of sound, no immediate alarm, no flashing warning light, just a child turning a knob slightly, and just a smell that slowly built over time. Just a busy family going about their day. It is a reminder that safety warnings only work if we recognize the situation in time. And sometimes recognition is not instant. This experience changed how I think about gas safety. Now, if I smell even the faintest hint of something sulfur-like in my own home, I do not hesitate. I check the stove. I check the oven. I double-check every knob. I make sure nothing is partially turned. I also understand now how easy it is to second-guess yourself. You might think you are imagining it. You might assume it is coming from outside. You might decide to wait and see if it fades. That hesitation can be dangerous. If something smells wrong, especially something chemical or sulfur-like, it is better to overreact than underreact. Open windows if it is safe. Avoid turning on lights or appliances. Get outside. Call emergency services. My sister-in-law and her husband were incredibly lucky. They did not experience an explosion. They did not suffer severe poisoning. They caught the problem before something irreversible happened. But it could have gone differently. That is what stays with me. We often imagine disasters as loud, dramatic events that announce themselves clearly. Sometimes they are quiet. Sometimes they move slowly. Sometimes they begin with something as small as a slightly turned knob. And sometimes the difference between a tragedy and a close call is one moment of awareness at exactly the right time. If you ever find yourself near the waters of the Orinoco or the Amazon and you catch a strong smell that reminds you of musty, rotting fish, do not ignore it. Do not brush it off as swamp gas or decaying plants. Move away from the water immediately. That advice is not superstition or jungle folklore. It was one of the first serious warnings our guide gave us when I spent time in the Orinoco Basin. He did not say it in a joking way, and he did not exaggerate for dramatic effect. He said it calmly but firmly, like someone who had seen enough to know exactly what that smell could mean. The rivers there are beautiful in a quiet, deceptive way. Brown water flowing slowly under thick green canopies, sunlight filtering through leaves, birds calling somewhere above you. From a distance, the shoreline can look peaceful, almost inviting. The kind of place where you might crouch down to splash water on your face, or step closer to look at something floating near the edge. But that calm is not safety. Anacondas are not loud creatures. They do not rattle or hiss like snakes people are more familiar with in North America. They do not give you a dramatic warning. They are patient. They are still. They blend into their surroundings so well that even trained eyes can miss them. Most of their body remains submerged. Often only their head breaks the surface, and even that can look like nothing more than a stick or a piece of debris floating in the water. In the murky currents of the Orinoco and Amazon, visibility is poor. You cannot see what is beneath the surface. Our guide made it clear from the beginning. Do not approach the shoreline carelessly, especially in areas where leaves and branches gather. He told us that if we ever caught a strong, heavy, fishy, swamp-like odor, we needed to step back immediately. He described the smell before I ever experienced it myself. He said it would not be subtle. It would be thick and damp, like rotting fish mixed with mud and stagnant water, not fresh fish from the ocean, something heavier, earthier, a smell that clings to the air. The first time I noticed it, I did not connect it right away. We were walking along a section of riverbank where the water slowed and curved inward. Debris had collected there. Leaves floated in small circles near the edge. Tree roots reached down into the mud, creating dark pockets beneath them. It looked like any other shaded part of the river. Then the smell hit. It was strong enough to make me wrinkle my nose immediately. I remember thinking that something must have died nearby. It was the kind of odor that makes you instinctively take shallower breaths. Our guide stopped walking. He did not shout. He did not run. He simply raised his hand slightly and told us to step back slowly. His tone shifted just enough for us to understand that this was serious. As I looked more carefully at the riverbank, I noticed something I had not paid attention to before. There were openings in the mud, smooth, rounded holes carved into the embankment just above the waterline. They were not random gaps. They looked shaped, worn, repeatedly used. They were large enough to fit something thick and heavy. They looked like caves for snakes. The openings were tucked beneath tree roots and in shaded areas where water met land. Perfect ambush spots. From there, something could remain hidden and surge forward with little warning. That is another thing people misunderstand about large snakes like anacondas. They are not slow in water. They can launch themselves forward with shocking speed. 2/3 of their body can come out of the water in an instant if they are striking at prey. It is not dramatic in the cinematic sense. It is fast and efficient. Standing there, smelling that odor, staring at those openings in the mud, I felt something shift inside me. It was not pure fear, it was awareness, a sudden realization that I was in an environment where I was not at the top of the food chain. The water remained calm. There were no obvious ripples, no visible movement. That almost made it worse. The danger was invisible. We slowly backed away from the shoreline, giving the water distance. As we moved uphill and away from the curve in the river, the smell began to fade. Only then did I realize how tense my body had been. My shoulders were tight. My breathing had been shallow. I never actually saw the anaconda that day, and in some ways, not seeing it made the experience more powerful. The absence of something visible forces your imagination to work harder. You know something is there. You can smell it. You can see the evidence of its presence in the embankment, but it remains hidden. That smell is something I will never forget. It is damp and musky. It carries the weight of something ancient and reptilian. It is not just decay. It feels alive. And there is something instinctual about how humans react to certain scents. The smell of smoke immediately triggers caution. The smell of decay makes you alert. That musty, fishy odor near those rivers felt like a built-in warning system. I have thought about it since returning home. How easy it would have been to step closer for a better look. How natural it would have felt to crouch down and dip a hand into the water. In many environments that would be harmless. But not there. The Orinoco and Amazon are living systems filled with creatures perfectly adapted to their surroundings. Anacondas do not need to chase prey across land. They wait, they blend in. They use murky water and debris as camouflage. Our guide later explained that areas with heavy plant cover, slow-moving water, and accumulated debris are prime hiding spots. Anywhere the shoreline dips or curves inward, creating a pocket of still water, you should be cautious. Add in that unmistakable smell, and it becomes a clear signal to back away. It only takes a second, one step too close, one moment of distraction. Nature does not always provide loud warnings. What stays with me most is how peaceful it looked before the smell reached us. Sunlight on brown water, leaves drifting lazily, birds calling in the distance. It felt calm enough to lower your guard. But the smell cut through that illusion instantly. If you ever find yourself near those waters and catch that heavy, musty, fish-like odor, trust your instincts. Create space between you and the shoreline. Respect the environment you are in, because in places like that, you are sharing the space with something powerful, silent, and perfectly hidden. And sometimes the only warning you get is in the air itself. Most people do not immediately connect strange smells, odd sensations, or sudden mental shifts with something as serious as a seizure. If you have never experienced one, it is easy to assume that seizures always look dramatic, like someone collapsing and shaking on the ground. But the reality is far more complex. Seizures can begin quietly, subtly, and in ways that are easy to dismiss. One of the earliest warning signs some people experience is called an aura. An aura is not mystical or symbolic. It is a neurological event. It can feel different for each person. For some, it is a sudden smell that has no source in the environment. For others, it might be a metallic taste in the mouth, a flash of light, a strange wave of fear, or a rising sensation in the stomach. Some people describe it as déjà vu. Others feel a sudden sense of doom that makes no logical sense. The important thing is that these sensations are real to the person experiencing them. Even though there is nothing physically present causing them, they are not imagination. They are the brain misfiring in a specific way. Seizures themselves also vary widely. Some are what people call absence seizures, where someone simply stares blankly for a minute or two. They may look like they are daydreaming. Others involve fainting or sudden loss of muscle control. Some people experience stiffening or repetitive movements, such as lip smacking or hand gestures they cannot control. And yes, there are seizures that involve falling to the ground and full-body convulsions, which is the image most people are familiar with. Because seizures look different depending on the type, the early warning signs matter. If someone starts smelling odors that are not there or feeling unexplained electrical sensations in their body, it should not be ignored. Untreated seizures can lead to serious consequences. A person can fall and hit their head. Prolonged seizures can cause muscle breakdown, which can lead to kidney damage. In rare but very dangerous cases, a seizure can continue without stopping. That condition is called status epilepticus, and it is a medical emergency. The good news is that seizures are often manageable. Modern medicine offers several effective treatment options. Medications like lamotrigine and oxcarbazepine, sometimes known by brand names like Trileptal, are commonly prescribed and can work well for many people. Side effects vary, but with proper monitoring, many patients find a treatment plan that keeps seizures under control. I know all of this not just from reading about it, but from living through it. My seizures began in a way that felt small and confusing. I would suddenly smell something metallic or burnt, even though there was nothing around me that could explain it. Sometimes I would get a strange metallic taste in my mouth. It would appear suddenly and disappear just as quickly. I brushed it off at first. Then I began noticing repetitive movements. I would pinch my fingers together over and over again without realizing I was doing it. It was subtle, almost like a nervous habit, but I did not feel fully in control of it. At the time, I did not understand that these were focal seizures. As weeks turned into months, things escalated. I started collapsing without warning. One moment I would be standing or walking, and the next I would be on the floor. After these episodes, I would feel extremely tired, as if I had run for miles. My muscles would ache, my head would feel heavy and foggy. It took time before the pieces were connected. Doctors ran tests. There were appointments, scans, and questions. Eventually, the diagnosis became clear, but the most serious event happened before everything was fully under control. One day, I woke up in a hospital bed with no memory of how I got there. I had experienced continuous seizures. They did not stop on their own. In the emergency room, doctors had to inject medication to stop the episode. I stayed in the hospital for a week. During that time, I learned that I had developed acute kidney failure. The intense muscle contractions from the prolonged seizures had caused muscle tissue to break down. Proteins released into my bloodstream overwhelmed my kidneys. I had never heard of rhabdomyolysis before, but suddenly it was something I was living through. Lying in that hospital bed was one of the most frightening experiences of my life. The machines, the quiet beeping, the sterile smell of the room, all of it made the situation feel real in a way that no diagnosis had before. It forced me to confront the fragility of life. Up until then, I had spent much of my life worrying about how I was perceived. I avoided risks because I did not want to look foolish. I shaped my behavior around what I thought other people might think. I let fear guide too many of my choices. When you are staring at a hospital ceiling and wondering how close you came to something irreversible, your priorities shift quickly. I began asking myself a simple but powerful question. If I were about to die, what would I regret the most? The answer was not about career milestones or social status. It was about living cautiously, restricted by fear of judgment. I realized that if my life had ended in that hospital bed, I would have regretted not living more honestly. That realization changed me. After my diagnosis, I began taking medication twice a day. It took time to find the right balance. There were adjustments and monitoring, but eventually the seizures stopped. It has now been 12 years without a seizure. That number means more to me than I can easily put into words. Taking medication became part of my daily routine. I learned to pay attention to sleep, stress, and overall health. But more importantly, I began to live differently. I stopped making decisions based on fear of what others might think. I started valuing relationships more deeply. I focused on work that felt meaningful rather than impressive. I became more present. I am not grateful for having seizures, but I am grateful for the perspective they forced me to gain. If someone begins experiencing strange smells, unusual sensations, or brief episodes of spacing out, it is important to seek medical attention. There is no shame in neurological conditions. They are medical issues, not personal failures. A neurologist can provide answers and, in many cases, effective treatment. Sometimes I think back to that hospital week, the fear, the uncertainty, the quiet realization that life can change in an instant. 12 years seizure-free feels like a gift I do not take lightly. Every ordinary day feels more valuable because I understand how quickly it can be disrupted. Health should never be ignored. Unusual symptoms deserve attention, and if life gives you a second chance, it is worth using it wisely. I still take my medication every day. I still attend checkups, but I also live with a clearer sense of what matters. In many ways, surviving those seizures did not just save my life, it reshaped it. When I was a kid, I did not think much about how powerful our sense of smell can be. I knew certain things smelled bad and certain things smelled good, but I never really understood that sometimes a smell can be a warning sign. It can tell you that something is wrong before you even feel sick. That realization came to me in a strange and uncomfortable way, and it is something I have never forgotten. One afternoon, I went to my aunt's house because she had recently rescued a litter of kittens. She was always the kind of person who took in animals that needed help. If there was a stray cat, an abandoned dog, or a bird with an injured wing, she would somehow end up caring for it. That week, she had taken in several tiny kittens. They were small, playful, and constantly climbing over each other in a cardboard box she had set up with blankets. As soon as I walked into the room where the kittens were, I noticed something unusual. There was a smell. It was not the normal animal smell I was used to. I had been around cats before. I knew what litter boxes smelled like. I knew what pet food smelled like. This was different. It was unpleasant in a way I could not describe at the time. It was weird and bitter, almost sour, but not exactly. It was sharp enough that I noticed it immediately, but not so overwhelming that I said anything. I remember thinking that maybe it was just because they were so young or because they had been rescued from outdoors. I did not question it much. I sat on the floor and played with them anyway. They climbed into my lap. They nibbled on my fingers. They brushed their tiny bodies against my clothes. Now I laughed and stayed there longer than I probably should have. I was just excited to be around them. After I left, I did not think about the smell again that day. It faded into the background of normal childhood distractions. School, homework, television, dinner. Life moved on. A few days later, something strange happened. I went to the bathroom and noticed a familiar odor. It took me a second to recognize it, but when I did, my stomach dropped. It was the exact same smell I had noticed on the kittens. The same weird, bitter, sour scent that had seemed so unusual at my aunt's house. At first, I tried to convince myself I was imagining it. Maybe I was remembering it incorrectly. Maybe it was something I had eaten. But the smell was unmistakable. It was identical. The next day, I started feeling sick. It began with stomach cramps. Not severe at first, but uncomfortable enough that I knew something was wrong. Soon after, I developed diarrhea. It was persistent and unpleasant. I felt weak and slightly feverish. My parents decided it was time to see a doctor. At the appointment, they asked questions about what I had eaten recently. They asked about contact with animals. When I mentioned the kittens, the doctor paid closer attention. A stool sample was taken and sent for testing. The result came back as salmonella. Salmonella is something most people associate with contaminated food, especially undercooked poultry or eggs. What I learned later is that reptiles, birds, and even mammals can carry salmonella bacteria. Kittens, especially young or rescued ones, can be carriers. What made the experience stick with me was the smell. Salmonella in contaminated food does not have a distinct odor. You cannot look at food and smell it to determine whether it is contaminated. That is part of what makes it dangerous. But in feces, salmonella can produce a very specific, recognizable smell. Once you have encountered it, it is hard to forget. As a child, I did not have the language to describe it medically. All I knew was that the strange odor I noticed on the kittens had returned in a very personal way. Looking back, I realized that the kittens were likely carrying the bacteria. They may not have seemed sick in an obvious way. Young animals can carry pathogens without severe symptoms. When I handled them and then touched my face or did not wash my hands thoroughly, the bacteria found its way into my system. The incubation period for salmonella can range from hours to a few days. The timeline matched perfectly. What unsettled me the most was how subtle the beginning of it all had been. A faint smell in a room, a brief thought that something seemed off. No immediate illness, no dramatic warning. Then, a few days later, my body was reacting strongly. Salmonella infections can cause diarrhea, abdominal cramps, fever, and dehydration. In most healthy children and adults, it resolves with supportive care and fluids. But it can be serious, especially in very young children, older adults, or people with weakened immune systems. I recovered after a difficult week. It was unpleasant, but manageable. What stayed with me, though, was how clearly my memory linked the smell to the illness. It made me more aware of hygiene around animals. By washing hands thoroughly after touching pets, especially young or rescued animals, is not just a suggestion. It is essential. Children, in particular, are at higher risk because they often put their hands near their mouths without thinking. It also taught me something about how the human brain connects sensory experiences. That unusual odor made an impression on me even before I understood why. Later, when I encountered it again, my brain immediately recognized it. Smell is powerful. It is tied closely to memory and emotion. In this case, it became tied to illness. When I think back on that time, I remember the excitement of playing with tiny kittens. I remember not wanting to stop holding them, but I also remember that weird, bitter scent lingering in the room. At the time, it was just something odd. Later, it became a clear signal of what had happened. It was a simple childhood experience, but it left a lasting lesson. Animals can carry bacteria even if they look healthy. Hygiene matters more than we sometimes realize. And sometimes the first sign that something is wrong is something as subtle as a smell you cannot quite explain. Even now, if I encounter a similar odor, it triggers that memory instantly. It reminds me of that week of the doctor's office. of learning that something invisible had passed from those tiny kittens into my system. It was not dramatic, it was not life-threatening, but it was uncomfortable enough to make me more cautious and more aware. And it all started with a smell I had never encountered before. I never thought much about how my body communicated with me. If something hurt, I dealt with it. If I felt tired, I blamed stress or lack of sleep. Like many people, I ignored small changes because they did not seem serious. It took living with Crohn's disease to completely change that mindset. And surprisingly, one of the earliest and most reliable warning signs I experienced had to do with something most people would rather not talk about at all. Before I was officially diagnosed, I started noticing a very specific change in my body. My gas would suddenly smell unbelievably bad. Not the kind of bad that comes from eating too much junk food or trying a new dish. This was different. It was intense, sharp, and deeply unpleasant. The only way I could describe it was that it smelled like something inside me was decaying. At first, I brushed it off. Digestive systems are unpredictable. Everyone has days when things feel off. I assumed I had eaten something that did not sit well. Maybe it was dairy, maybe it was stress. I did not connect it to anything serious. It felt random, like one of those temporary annoyances you do not think twice about. But over time, I started noticing a pattern. Every single time that specific smell appeared, something worse followed. Within a day or two, I would begin to feel abdominal pain. It would start as a dull ache and then grow sharper. My stomach would feel tight and swollen, like it was inflamed from the inside. Fatigue would creep in next. Not normal tiredness, but a heavy, draining exhaustion that made even simple tasks feel overwhelming. Then the flare would fully arrive. For anyone who does not live with Crohn's disease, it can be hard to understand what a flare truly means. It is not just a stomach ache or a bit of discomfort. It is inflammation in the digestive tract that can cause ulcers, bleeding, severe pain, and long-term tissue damage. It can affect appetite, nutrient absorption, mood, sleep, and energy levels. When a flare hits hard, it takes over your life. Once I connected the pattern, I realized that the smell was not random at all. It was an early signal. Something inside my digestive system was changing before the full wave of symptoms became obvious. The inflammation was already building. The gut bacteria were likely shifting. The chemical environment in my intestines was being altered in ways I could not see, but I could definitely smell. Inflammation changes everything in the digestive tract. It disrupts the balance of healthy bacteria. It affects how food is broken down. It alters the gases produced during digestion. What I had once dismissed as a minor inconvenience turned out to be my body's early warning system. It felt unsettling to understand that what I was smelling was essentially the byproduct of internal inflammation and tissue stress. It was not just digestion. It was my body struggling beneath the surface. At first, I was embarrassed by it. It is not exactly something you want to bring up in casual conversation. But once I recognized the pattern, I stopped ignoring it. I started treating it like a signal flare. When that extreme change would happen, I would pay closer attention. I would monitor how I was feeling. I would adjust my diet more carefully. I would consider whether I needed to contact my doctor sooner, rather than waiting for the flare to fully take hold. Crohn's disease can escalate quickly. What begins as mild inflammation can turn into something far more serious if not addressed. Catching a flare early can mean adjusting medication, resting more, or making dietary changes before the inflammation spirals out of control. I often think back to the early days before my diagnosis. If I had paid attention to that signal sooner, I might have sought medical help earlier. Instead, I ignored it until the pain became impossible to dismiss. Living with a chronic illness forces you to become more aware of your body than you ever expected. You learn the subtle differences between normal discomfort and something more serious. You learn how your body whispers before it screams. For most people, occasional digestive changes are just that, occasional. But if something changes suddenly and consistently, especially if it feels extreme or unusual compared to your normal baseline, it is worth paying attention. A dramatic shift in gut odor can indicate changes in the microbiome. It can signal inflammation. It can reflect infection or malabsorption. The digestive system is incredibly complex, and when it is under stress, it often communicates in ways that are not polite or convenient. There is also something important about overcoming the embarrassment around digestive health. It is easy to dismiss symptoms because they feel awkward to discuss. But avoidance does not protect your health. Silence does not reduce inflammation. Ignoring early warning signs can lead to bigger problems down the line. Crohn's disease has affected many areas of my life. It has impacted my energy, my mood, my social plans, and even my confidence at times. During a flare, everything feels heavier. It is harder to focus, harder to sleep, harder to function at your usual level. That is why recognizing early signs matters so much. For me, that smell became a clear and reliable signal. It was not subtle once I understood it. It meant my body was under stress and that I needed to take action. Over time, I stopped seeing it as something embarrassing and started seeing it as useful information. My body was trying to communicate. It was telling me that inflammation was building and that I should not ignore it. Now, whenever I notice that change, I respond. I slow down. I monitor my symptoms carefully. I reach out to my doctor if necessary. I treat it as the early alert that it is. This may not apply to everyone. Many people experience temporary digestive changes without it meaning anything serious. But if you notice a sudden, extreme, and persistent shift in how your body functions, especially if it is accompanied by pain, fatigue, or other symptoms, it is worth getting checked out. Your body often knows something is wrong before you do. It sends signals in whatever way it can. Living with Crohn's has taught me to listen more closely. Even the uncomfortable signals matter. Sometimes they are the first sign that something serious is developing beneath the surface. It may not be a dramatic story filled with flashing lights or emergency rooms, but it changed how I understand my own health. It taught me that even something as ordinary and overlooked as a change in smell can be meaningful. And once you recognize those patterns, you cannot unsee them. Thank you for spending your night with me. I hope these lullabies stay with you, but not too close. If you found these stories chilling, please like the video and subscribe to join the family. Every comment and sub helps us keep the darkness growing. Get as comfortable as you can, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Sweet dreams.